If you're struggling with things like laziness, inconsistency, boundaries, or lack thereof, gossip, anger, anxiety, addiction, lust, fornication, gluttony, or greed, you're probably going to want to hear this. If you're struggling to work on these things, there's something that you may be missing that would help you to understand what the root of your problem is. There's a critical quality that a lot of us are missing, and that's why it's a struggle to fight these things. This critical quality is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Self-control also can be called temperance. Now, self-control is the ability to control oneself. It is exercise over one's own impulses, emotions, or desires. These include our lusts and our temptations. Through our flesh, this is something that is pretty challenging to do, but through the Spirit, we are able. The fruit of the Holy Spirit are recorded in Galatians 5, verse 22 and 23 as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. All of these things we achieve through the Holy Spirit. We know that 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control, or a sound mind. This spirit that he has given us, and this which he has given us, is by the Holy Spirit, which is his gift to us. This gift is a gift of revelation, comfort, guidance, all the things that we need to live a godly life. What I've learned about self-control is that it is the most critical fruit of the Spirit, as it helps us to demonstrate the other fruits. And we, being of flesh, need self-control so that we do not succumb to the sinful nature of our own flesh. Self-control truly helps us live a godly life. We know in Romans 12 that we are called to offer ourselves as living sacrifices to God that are holy and acceptable for him for reasonable service. But in order to offer ourselves as that, we must control and kill our flesh daily. And we must allow for the Spirit to move within us. But of course, we must first accept it. There is a struggle with flesh that we experience that Paul even describes. This is the struggle with what we want to do and the evil that we don't want to do, but the sin inside of us that makes us do the evil, or that makes us perform the sin. This is in Romans 7:15. In this passage, Paul also describes another power within that is at war with the mind, and it makes us a slave to the sin. But because of Christ, we no longer are bound or condemned by our own nature. Because of Christ, we have been given a gift that can overpower this nature. Again, the Holy Spirit. One thing that we have to realize is that self-control starts with surrender and the receiving of the Holy Spirit, who then controls us. And if anyone is offended by the word control, we know that this is not a manipulation control, but it's a guidance. Paul says in Romans 8 that those who are controlled by the Holy Spirit think about things that please the Spirit. Therefore, they will do the things that please it as well. But in that same way, those who are controlled by their sinful nature, they think about sinful things and do them to please their flesh. But we know that this leads to death. This is why the lack of self-control in areas can literally kill you. For example, overeating, alcohol, drug addiction, fornication, and obsessive habits. They can physically kill your body and also spiritually. We have to stop and ask ourselves, am I controlled by my sinful nature, or am I controlled by the Holy Spirit? Am I led by my flesh, or am I allowing the Holy Spirit to move in me so that God's will and work can be done? Paul teaches us that without self-control, comforts and pleasures become our masters, and we are led to sin. Without self-control, we can also experience delay, hindrance in our spiritual walk, and become easy targets for the enemy to attack our lives, to keep us bound up in cycles, repetitive patterns, and to never truly see any progress, especially if you lack self-control or self-discipline in business areas or responsibilities in your life. Boundaries and a lack thereof are also a place where the enemy will come in and try to have his way. Self-control leads us to acknowledge boundaries, to have them, and to not let them be crossed. Lack of boundaries can cause for doors and access points to be open, for the enemy to come in, or for him to use people in your life to get to you. And that's something that most of us experience, especially when we are dealing with our trauma. Abandonment, rejection, things of that nature cause us to operate in ways where we allow any and everything to omit a sense of control and order in our lives. But God's grace is sufficient for that too. One of the things we must understand is that self-control is a work or fruit of the Holy Spirit. It's not something that we can produce in our own strength. The Spirit is always willing, but the flesh is weak. So we have to rely on the Holy Spirit to produce it. And because of the Holy Spirit dwelling in us, we have the ability to exercise it. And we have the authority to as well. Now the question is, how do we exercise this gift? How do we exercise this ability? How do we exercise this fruit and multiply it? We allow the Holy Spirit to come in and move us. And we allow ourselves to be moved by the Holy Spirit completely in everything. And this starts with trust. It starts with honor and reverence to God. It starts with a desire to please Him. It starts with knowing Him, His grace, and what He has given to us, and the tools and resources He has given to us to survive, to operate, to go forth in this life. It starts when we can accept and acknowledge the gift of help, the Holy Spirit, to be our guide. Then we must discipline our bodies, and this we start with in the Spirit. We develop habits of prayer, Bible study, meditation, fasting, worship, and strengthening our faith. We begin with creating some spiritual discipline in our lives. If you are aware that everything happens in the spirit before it happens in the natural, then you can understand how getting our spiritual lives in order will help get our flesh in order, or our natural lives. Because self-control is the work of the Holy Spirit, the spiritual discipline is absolutely necessary. It's by prayer and Bible study and meditation and fasting and worship and practices such as these that we begin to truly learn God, hear from Him, understand and recognize His Spirit, His character and His love and His grace for it all. And we are able to move in it. We gain understanding and strength all at the same time. And this gives us the push that we need. This forms the order in our lives. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against an enemy and powers of an unseen world that afflict us through our flesh. Unseen world is the spiritual matter of things. That must be where we start. That must be where we gain some discipline, where we operate. If we can understand that the Holy Spirit gives us self-control, it can help us to fight better the natural side of fighting lust, of fighting addiction, of fighting anger, anxiety, lack of boundaries, laziness, and all the things that the enemy uses against us in the natural, against all the temptations that we see. God truly desires for us to have self-control. And through grace and salvation, He trains us to live a self-controlled life. Of course, as long as we allow Him to. Philippians chapter 2, verse 13 reminds us that God is working in us, giving us the desire and the power to do what pleases Him, because we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. In these end times, our self-control will be critical, for we will need to be led by the Spirit for strength and power in the will of God being done. The controlling of your emotions will be critical. The controlling of your desires will be critical. And the controlling of your impulses and urges and movement will be critical. If you've been struggling heavily in areas of your life where you have obsession, where you have impulse, where you have urge that you're struggling to fight, there's help for you. And the help is in the Holy Spirit. Ask God to reveal to you where you lack self-control. And in those places where you are lacking it, ask God to work on you. Surrender. Realize that it's not by your strength. It's not by power nor by might. It's by His Spirit. And you can depend on Him for that. He's ready and willing to produce it in you. All you have to do is open up your heart. Allow Him to come in. Accept the gift. I gave it to you through grace. Allow Him to come into that area of your life and allow Him to do the work. Allow Him to give you the strength and the power to exercise self-control. When you begin to recognize those areas of your life where you're lacking self-control, or beginning to see how you're not trusting God in that area, or how you're not trusting Him to help you in that area, you'll see that you can release. You'll see that God is truly asking you to give it over to Him, to give that lust, to give that temptation, to give that struggle over to Him, to give every anxiety, to give every worry or concern that you obsess over, to give it to Him. And when you begin to focus on what is pleasing the Spirit, you'll find that the pressure against your flesh, or the pressure to fight in your flesh, is less. You'll see that God does not expect you to defeat this thing on your own. He invites you and He wants you to commission His help, to just serve, trust, and follow Him, and let Him take care of the rest.